All right. So, all right. Okay. So there was this Baptist and there was this Muslim, and they walked into See, every bad joke you've ever heard in your life is up here in front of you right now, all right, including me. But no, we're gonna have a great conversation here. Want you to join it. So if there's not a number back here, there will be soon. It's the one I called out in the opening session. A 443 number comes to this little cheapo track phone. And if you want, and we've got one or two already. So if you want to send a message here, just send it on, and we'll try to get to it. So here's the deal. Anytime you have, and I described this in the beginning of our time together, anytime you have worldviews as different as what we're experiencing now, and we have to admit, we're just dealing with very, very different worldviews. And when they come together in the same space, they can either clash or they can collaborate. And which of those two happens often depends on what kind of relationship both are dependent on having with the other. And so as I shared in the earlier part, nobody's interested in compromising faith tonight. That's not what we want to do. I've been walking with my Muslim friends and Jewish friends for a number of years now. With the folks at ATFA especially, just become very dear friends of mine. And I think they will tell you, my theological convictions haven't moved an inch. But I have moved into some great and precious friendships with them that I just wouldn't trade for anything in the world. I've learned from them. I've gone into their culture as a learner at their invitation, and that's caused me to just see the world in a different light. And so I still believe Jesus died to save the world, but it's caused me to see that world very differently and in a way that I think I probably didn't before. And in many ways, I don't know if this was your aim, but I think it's probably made me a better Christian to be in the environment that I've been in with them and to walk with them. But we're going to talk about similarities tonight, where we can walk together, what we've learned about one another, our friendships. We're going to talk about differences, and we're going to drill down to what the real differences are. I know there's a lot of confusion out there. We'll get into a little bit of religious freedom for those of you who weren't in Suhail's earlier breakout. We'll talk a little bit about Jesus, who we believe he is. We'll get into some of that. But we'll start just kind of getting used to some folks. Let me tell you who's here. You met Suhail a little earlier. Institute for Global Engagement, also an attorney, lives and works in Washington, D.C., which is probably the worst thing we could say about Suhail. But glad he's here. Jim Edmonson is a pastor at Elders Baptist Church, just up the road here in Eldersburg, Maryland. He and I were in Turkey together with our friends from ATFA and Rumi. Larry Steen is the senior pastor of Westminster Baptist Church, about 30 minutes up the road from here. They actually have hosted the Muslim group to come in. We had a lot to learn from each other, had a great Q&A, kind of like this one, during that time, and so Larry's had that exposure. Murat Ozbas, whom you've met as well, president of ATFA. Brian Corrick, pastor here at Gethsemane, and the one you haven't met yet is Imam Bilal Anyaya. He's become a dear friend. He is the Imam at the Ezer Mosque. Did I pronounce that correctly? Okay, I'm trying my best not to slaughter names here. In Fairfax, Virginia. I got to know him really well. He's made several trips up here. I've made several down there. One way you know we're friends is we're willing to fight that beltway traffic to get to one another. And so, man, glad to have all of you here tonight. Let me start. I do have a few questions already on the phone. Please send them in. Is the number up yet? It should be on up there in just a second. Send them in if you want them. But let me start with just a couple. And you guys, this is just a free for all. Just jump in. You volunteered to be here. Why? Let's just start with something like that. Why do you think it's important for you in your identity with the people you lead to be on this stage talking about what we're talking about tonight?
Well, I guess I can.
Yeah.
I guess I could start. I think that I mentioned earlier that particularly in our context, the melting pot that we live in culturally. You know, as Christians, we believe that as Christians, number one thing is, obviously, and we've heard some talk about this evening, that we want to love our neighbors. We believe we have a mandate to do that, to serve our neighbors. We want to be able to share Christ with our neighbors, and not just the message, but also we want to share Christ in our behavior. So for me as a Christian, as a leader of a congregation, I think it's pretty simple and obvious that we can't accomplish those goals if we don't know our neighbors. And so, we want to get to know the people around us, the people who share this context with us, whatever background they have, whether it's different cultural background or religious background. We just want to know them better and love them like Christ would, and serve them the way that we believe that Christ would have us serve them. And we just, in order to do that and accomplish that, we need to know each other. And then also, I do think that there are lots of issues that we share common ground on outside of our theological differences. And I think it would just be foolish as well not to work with one another where we can agree and learn from each other as we do that. So that's why, as a leader of a local church, that's why I would be involved.
Excellent. Bilal?
Well, the reason for me to be here is...
There you go.
Is it good?
There you go.
Okay. The reason for me to be here is sort of twofold. One is to personally learn, which I did learn a lot of things today. And also, after learning, so as an imam, as a religious leader, to show our members that Muslims and Christians and Jews and other followers of other faith can come together, and it's not forbidden in Islam to talk to people who are not Muslims. It's actually encouraged in the Quran and in the Sunnah, which is the life and sayings of the Prophet Muhammad. It's encouraged in the Sunnah as well. And throughout the history of Islam, we can see this. Muslims and followers of other faith lived together side by side. And these days, especially in these years, the polarization is taking place. And it is very important to show that as the religious leaders, we can come together and understand from each other and learn from each other and live this in my life and show it to the members of our congregation.
Excellent. Yeah.
You're hogging the microphone.
Yeah, it
Is this the one?
It's on.
There we go. A little over, I guess, about 2 years ago, the invitation was given from the organization, Murat, that you are with, for some pastors to go to Turkey. And I know Jim went, and I did not have the opportunity at that point for personal reasons that I could not go, but the assistant pastor at our church, Pastor Chris, went. And, he came back with reports of, wow, everybody was so gracious. They treated us so well in Turkey. We ate well. We had lively conversation, and friendships were developed. And we've actually had representatives, again, Murat, and from your organization, and Murat, you to come to our church. And we had some opportunity to dialogue back and forth. And I thought that was very healthy. And, I kind of agree, I don't have that much opportunity in Westminster to get to know too many Muslim folks. And so that's a great opportunity, and an opportunity to be on stage with you guys and just to share some thoughts together. So I'm very appreciative of that.
That's good. Very good. Yeah, you guys have driven quite a ways, actually. You've gone as far as Perryville.
Yes.
So everybody here know where Perryville is? You go all the way to the end of the earth and turn left, and that's Perryville. And yet that's, one of the more precious times that you guys have had is with the First Baptist Church up there, Pastor John Gauger. I think they fixed some great food for you guys.
They came to our community center twice for Ramadan.
Did they?
Yeah, so.
Okay. In July.
Yeah.
In July, which is a horrible time for Ramadan, because you can't eat, you can't drink, and it's 1,000 degrees outside. So that you guys really pushed through that one hard.
For me, it's a little easy because I work in office, so I have AC. So
You do, right? Yeah, yeah. You're like me. You don't really work for a living, right? Is that's the way that goes?
The first 2 days are difficult. Rest is easy.
Rest is
Down the
easy?
hill, yeah.
Sounds like a fast. Yeah, yeah. Let me give you guys the number again, just so apparently we're just having some difficulty getting on the screen. It's 443-325-2391. 443-325-2391. Let me ask you this. This is about getting along with one another. We've been pretty clear about that we don't need to, you don't need to compromise faith in order to do that. In particular, since Rabbi Heifetz was supposed to be with us tonight, but he had another commitment come up suddenly and was unable to be with us. So now it's just, so you don't have the complete joke. You just have the Baptists and the Muslims. You don't have the Jew to go with it. So, but we're Christians and Muslims on the stage together that believe things that at their core are not reconcilable with one another. And yet here we are, and we're in friendship with one another, and obviously we're all here, and you are too, because you're trying to foster peace. You're trying to get, as I said earlier, beyond tolerance. Can you speak to your own faith for just a minute? If you're Muslim, speak to Islam. If you're Christian, speak to Christianity. What is it about your own faith that motivates you to say, I must be in relationship with that person?
I don't know why I keep having to be the guy that's. I said I was going to take the hard questions and give them to Jim, but it's not really a hard question. Again, you know, I think that for me, and I want to speak clearly as a Christian man and as a pastor, is the you know, I want to follow Jesus, and everything that I do, I believe that Jesus has called me to follow in His footsteps. And one of the keys to our understanding as Christians of Jesus is the incarnation of Jesus, and that Jesus actually became a man and dwelt among men. And as the Bible says, the Word became flesh, and He dwelt among us. He made His tabernacle, was dwelling here. And as a Christian, part of following Jesus is that I want to be incarnational with people. I want to dwell amongst them. I want to be in their lives and be involved in their lives. You know, there's a passage in the Bible, the New Testament, in 1 Corinthians 5, where Paul is scolding the church for a particular matter. And he tells them, you know, that he said, I told you not to keep company with these types of people. But then he says, you know, but certainly I didn't mean the world, because then you would have to leave the world. And the idea being that a Christian, a follower of Jesus, should always be engaged with the world around them. And so that's why I was.
That's good.
Well, first of all, in the Quran, the holy book of Muslims, the chapter Surah Al-Hujurat, I guess the number for that chapter is 49, and verse number is either 13 or 12, somewhere around there. I'm not very much sure, because it's not how we learn in Islam to memorize the numbers of the surahs and the verses and everything. So I'm not quite yet there.
It's all right.
It says, we have created you from man and woman, and made you into nations. And at close to the end of that verse, it says, so that you may get to know each other. For a lot of religious leaders, or Muslims for that effect, this has been understood as, well, you could do this, you know. But in my opinion, like getting to know your neighbors, getting to know other people than your own faith, is really an obligation for a Muslim. To be in dialogue, to learn from followers of other faith, is an obligation. That's one reason for me to be here. And we see this in the applications of the Prophet in his life. And he was in dialogue with Jews, he was in dialogue with Christians and other Arabs as well. So basically this is, I guess, the primary reason for me to come and be here tonight.
Thank you.
I'm here and desiring to build bridges with people of different cultures and different faiths because of an answer that Jesus gave one day to an expert in the law. The expert in the law asked Jesus, "What is the greatest commandment?" And Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your mind, with all of your strength. This is the first and the greatest of the commandments, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself." We Christians believe you cannot be right with God if you are not right with other men, with your brothers or sisters or your neighbors or your coworkers. And, you know, Christianity's all big about going into the world as missionaries and all that, and I believe in that. But the world quite literally is here in America now. And, you know, I mean, look at this gathering tonight. If we cannot learn at least to communicate, we will never be able to survive as a country. We've got to be, even though we may have different beliefs that, as Joel said, are irreconcilable, that doesn't mean we can't work together, we can't live next door to each other, we cannot be friends. And that's why I'm here.
There you go. You want it? Sure.
Well, thanks again for including me. I would add to what has been said. I definitely echo those sentiments. My personal reason for being here is that, again, I feel that we live in a broken world, and that I can't just be a bystander and sit as there are challenges that we face, whether they're in our communities with homelessness and poverty and drug addiction and so many other challenges, or there are threats to our national security or international challenges to religious freedom and the sovereignty of others and their lives. And particularly when many of those challenges are coming from groups that are engaged in these activities in the name of my faith, I feel that it's imperative that for somebody who seeks to guide their life by their faith, by my faith, that I have to take action. That faith is not just a matter of belief, but it's also a matter of practice and action. And has been said earlier today that in the Quran we are instructed that if somebody were to take one innocent life, it's like he has taken all of humanity. But if he's to save a life, it's like he has saved all of humanity. And so I just hope to humbly serve my neighbor, my country, and others who love freedom. And that's something I know that is not unique to Islam, but it is shared by those who profess the Jewish and the Christian faith, and is so perfectly encapsulated in Matthew 5:9 that those blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be the children of God. And that's something that I aspire to be.
Very good.
Certainly both the Islamic faith and the Christian faith are both evangelical in the sense that we are called on to be witnesses of our faith to the world, to share our faith with others, in the hope that others may come to know Christ. And you know, the Bible over in the book of Acts, it talks about we're to be witnesses for Jesus Christ. We're to be witnesses in Judea, Samaria, in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, the uttermost parts of the world. We are to be witnesses in our hometown, in our local community, in the broader region, say, of Maryland, the United States, and ultimately in the world. And so the reason I'm here is I simply want to be a witness for Jesus Christ. And hopefully that as we talk and as we share with one another about our faith, that perhaps, you know, I will learn some things from you all, but I hope that in some sense you may see a little bit of Jesus in me.
Excellent. Yeah, I don't need it.
Oh, you don't
Yeah,
need
I'm
it.
all wired up.
Okay.
But no, that was great. Actually,
giving it back to you, like passing the baton.
there you go. Yeah, back and forth. Yeah, let's delve into that a little bit, and let's sort of cut to the chase here. I know I floated between sessions because I'm the one that set all this up, so that's my personal privilege, so I get to go all of those. Spent most of my time in here with Suhail. Just I knew he was dealing with a bunch of Baptists, so I wanted to make sure he was going to be okay. And he was. You guys were really nice to him. You really were. But you asked him a lot of pointed, direct, fair questions. And I know that a lot of it surrounded global issues, political Islam, those kinds of things. But really, when you come down to it, and there's a question coming. Just be patient with me for just a second, because I really think we need to define the scope of what we're talking about when we talk about Christianity and Islam. That the core difference really isn't about what's happening internationally or politically. In fact, when we find people of good faith and good conscience, people that want peace anywhere, we ought to pursue peace with them, no matter what they believe. And so when we talk about differences, it's not so much that. The difference really is, as you were talking about the person of Jesus. And I think that's where we kind of have to maintain some clarity, because I know there's not a pastor on this stage or probably anywhere in our 562 network of churches that believes you're going to go to heaven unless you worship Jesus as God. And that by default is the very thing that our Muslim friends would say you should not do, because they don't believe that he was. They don't believe that he was crucified. So the difference really is over that question of who is Jesus. I think that's where it lies. I think we ought to have discussions with each other, not out of a sense of competing religions or you're bad and I'm good or vice versa, but more out of a sense of we're on a search for truth together. We have come to very different conclusions, and we know we can't both be right. And so when we talk about that, we do it out of a sense of concern for the other soul, because we love each other, and not out of some sense of trying to win a debate or do something like that. Now, that said, here's what I want to ask you. What is it about our differences that, or let me ask it this way. How should our differences help, how should our differences inform our relationships with each other? Okay? And so, Imam Bilal, if you were at the mosque on Friday and you were going to preach a sermon about how Islam's belief that Jesus is not the Son of God, he is not God, he was not crucified. And you've got these Christians that you've told them, and because I've heard you say it, you need to be in relationship with them. How does that difference inform, or should it inform, how your people relate to them? And then Pastor Brian, the pastor's on the stage as well. Let me ask you that same question. How does that difference inform how we should relate to one another? And how can we do that in love, given those differences? We are doing it, so this ought to be a softball question, right?
Well, first of all, we need to recognize that we are all human beings. We may follow different paths towards God, and my path would be different than yours or someone else's. And as you repeatedly mentioned, that does not prevent us from coming together and learning from each other, right, and walking shoulder to shoulder.
Yeah.
So my faith, and as an imam in my congregation, first of all, I want our members, Muslims, to learn their religion very firmly. Then get into the dialogue with other members of other faith.
Yeah.
If someone, whether a Muslim, Christian, Jew, or whatever the tradition he or she may follow, is afraid of talking to other, afraid of engaging in dialogue with other, that means that person does not know his or her religion very well, because he or she is not comfortable with talking and discussing about it.
Yeah.
So for every person who follows a tradition, whether Islamic tradition, Christian, Jews, or Buddhist, what have you, I encourage them to know their tradition well, very well. It's not about, in my opinion, being in dialogue and going and talking to other people does not necessarily mean trying to convert. Does not necessarily mean spreading the good news that I have. What is most important for me is to live what I believe. And that is very important. And I would like to do all of these interfaith dialogues on this ground. And, either Quran or the Sunnah, or in general, the teachings of Islam, does not, again, sort of prohibit the engaging in dialogue with others.
Yeah.
So that's how I would want to do, that's how I'm trying to do in this environment.
Thank you. And I will back you up on that to say almost everywhere I've been in the Middle East, we can talk about faith. And it's been incredible to me to see, because here in the West, you're not supposed to talk about politics, you're not supposed to talk about religion. In the Middle East, if you don't talk about those two things, you don't have anything to talk about. That's been because you talk about what you talk about what you're passionate about. And so in North Africa, the experiences I've had there, when I came to your country, in all of its parts, both the European side of Istanbul, all the way to the Middle Eastern-esque Urfa and Haran, incredible warmth and openness and talk. And then they would find out we were Christians, and they knew that the Quran commanded them to learn about Jesus, and so they knew we knew about him. They also knew that there were some things about him that we believed that they didn't agree with, but we were always, might be the bus driver, your pastors, yeah, tell me something about Jesus. So it was a really neat time to be able to share that conversation.
Well, even though that may be the case in Turkey or in Middle Eastern countries, religion and politics are a very dangerous combination.
They are, yeah. Yeah, you don't want to talk about the two at the same time. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Pastors?
Yeah, I guess I'm going to put the friendliness of this event on edge here for just a second.
Okay.
And please understand, this is very difficult in a way for me because I am by nature a peacemaker. I don't like controversy. And I have broken bread with you. I don't know if you remember, sir, at the iftar dinner this past time, and hope to do so again. Would be delighted to do that one-on-one privately. I personally try not to have the word stranger in my vocabulary. But I would, from a Christian perspective, take a little bit of issue with what you have said about different paths. Because the Christian belief is that there is only one way to heaven, and that is through either Jesus Christ or no other way. Mm-hmm. Jesus says in John 14:6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And unfortunately, in our society today, not just in this room, but across our country, we have this idea that it's okay to practice that religion, and you can practice over there and do that, and you can practice that and do that. And in one way, that's a good thing, because we need, like this event, we need to be able to come together and get to know each other and to share our different values and recognize some common ground. But when it comes to Jesus Christ, he is everything to me. And in order to reach heaven, in Christianity, we believe that there is no other way, which means somebody's wrong, okay? And I don't mean that as a slam against Muslims or Jews or Hindus or anyone else, but think about it this way. You have an atheist who says there is no God. You have Muslims, Christians, and Jews who say that there is one God. You have Hindus who say that there are multiple gods. You have nature religions which say that the tree is God. Who's right? Okay, that's where we have to be able to be friends and to sit down in brotherhood and talk. But we all can't be right, because you cannot have no God, one God, and multiple gods. Somebody's got to be wrong. And we're not just talking about feeding the poor or, helping somebody get a job. We're talking about eternal life. And that's why Jesus Christ is so important to me, because in Christ I have found that assurance of my salvation. I don't worry about death. Death has no fear over me. Dying is another story. That can be long, that can be painful. I don't want to go there. But on the other side, I know exactly where I'm going to be because of my relationship to Christ. And I asked this question of Murat when you were at my church last summer, and I say my church, it's his, please understand that. I hate saying that, and you understand what I'm talking about. But I asked Murat, you'd like for us to be Muslims, wouldn't you? Sure. Oh, come on, don't answer.
It's okay. I'm going to say the same thing. Whether you're Christian, Jewish, or Muslim, obviously you believe your religion is right. Obviously you would want everyone else to believe what you believe.
Yep.
Exactly.
That's given.
And that should be the nature of every religion. Why do you why are you an imam? Because you believe Islam is right.
Yeah.
Why am I a pastor? Because I believe Christianity is right. And if our Jewish rabbi friend was here, he'd say the same thing, and so would every other religion. Unfortunately, it just can't be. In other words, somebody's got to be wrong.
Yeah.
You have, based on the Quran, certain ideas about who Jesus is. So do the Jews from their scriptures, and so do the Christians from our scriptures. We need to be able to, in friendship, talk about these differences in order to find who's right. Because, again, there's one side where we're working together in this realm, in this world, to try to advance civilization, and that's all good. But there's another side to it, and that's eternal life. And we don't want to miss that one.
Yeah. Now, you have not, you were talking about putting it on edge. I don't sense that you've done that at all, because it's the very thing we talked about tonight. Let's talk about the next world, because that's incredibly important.
Yeah.
Let's just do it while we're trying to work together to fix this one. And so that, you've spoken very well to the other side of that tonight. I have a colleague of mine who does research for a living. So, in other words, he's a nerd, but I love him. And he actually, he's an evangelical Christian, works for an evangelical organization similar to Gallup or Barna or someone like that. And he was in a meeting a few years back it was a multi-faith meeting. And there were several folks gathered from Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Baha'i, Hindu, all faith and no faith gathered in that room. And their idea was to research faith together, because there were certain things sociologically, the data would come back, it would be beneficial to all of them. And my friend, I remember him saying, he said, I just want to be honest with you, just because we're working together, we're friends and we're honest. He said, the churches that I work for want this information because they would actually like for some of you to become Christian. And a lot of folks took offense at that. The one person who didn't was the Imam. And he looked back at my friend and he looked at the crowd and he said, I feel the same way. And then very quickly he went, except not Christian, Muslim. My friend told me, he said, it's a strange day. And it really is a strange world in which in some ways I have more in common with a Muslim than I do with a mainline Lutheran. This is a weird day in which to live. And so I think it underscores the fact that we do, understanding what you believe and why is incredibly important. And doing that while you're in relationship with each other and relating to people as people. So that I don't see, when I sit down, this guy and me, we used to have offices right next to one another, and then I went and moved away. But when we shared lunch together, if all I saw was Muslim, You can't have a relationship that way. And that's no way to treat another human being. But what I did see was a human being created in God's image and likeness, because that's really, for those of us who are followers of Jesus, that's where our story begins, right? That's where it begins, in the garden. Now, we're evangelical Protestants, so we very much believe in total depravity and the fall, as we should. But the problem is when we start the story in chapter 2. When we start the story in chapter 2, that's what divides us from one another. And I've got the truth and you don't, and you need to just, and until you come to see my side of it, I can't really go into any deeper relationship than I am right now. That's a person who started the story in chapter 2. And that's not where the Bible starts it. It starts it in chapter 1. Created in God's image and likeness, worthy of dignity, of respect, worthy of the freedom of conscience that we've been talking about here. And so I guess I'm answering the question too. Our differences, I don't want to ignore those. I want to talk about them. But I want to do it in a way that promotes that friendship.
Yeah, as you mentioned, the differences are irreconcilable.
Sure.
They are irreconcilable.
It's not anything. It's not wrong. Yeah.
But, that doesn't mean that we can't love one another. In fact, I think the fact, Murat, that you would like to see me, a Muslim, as I would like to see you, a Christian, means we love each other enough to want the very best for each other.
Yeah, that's it. Suhail, and Suhail, who wanted the mic as well, here's a perfect example of this. Here's a Republican living in Washington, D.C., and no one's killed him yet. So that should tell you that there can be irreconcilable differences and coexistence, right?
No, you're putting your finger on, for many years, particularly in the 80s, when this kind of what is now called interfaith dialogue began, it was one of the reasons why I kind of stayed away from it, because traditionally what I had seen from the few instances where I attended such events was people trying to gloss over differences and trying to basically say all paths lead to God and let's just hold hands and we're all sing kumbaya. And that didn't appeal to me as somebody who felt that they were a mainstream traditional Muslim. There's a reason why I believe I'm Muslim, and I don't need to paper over my differences with other religions in order to feel comfortable with myself or with my neighbors. So I think what you said is exactly right, that there are irreconcilable differences that we need to acknowledge up front. And there's no amount of being friends or loving one another or trying to look for similarities that will in any way obscure or obfuscate those differences. They are there and they will always be there if we are to be authentically Jewish, Christian, or Muslim. But having said that, because that is for God to judge, what I hope is that we can then say, but we do agree that whether we are Jewish, Christian, or Muslim, that we are commanded to love our neighbor and to work to improve our society and to do good works, etc. And that we can do together, shoulder by shoulder. And if somebody asks us, why are you working to end poverty in your community, the pastor will say, because I love Jesus, and I'm doing it because I'm following the footsteps of Jesus. And I can say it as a Muslim, I'm doing it because I'm supposed to take care of the orphan as commanded in the Quran. And the Imam put his finger exactly on it, that as he quoted from the Quran, God says in that verse that he made us from one man and a woman. And he made us into many nations with many ethnicities and many languages and many faiths. Not so that we would war with one another, not so that we would have rancor and have conflict, but so that we would know each other and from that appreciate and love one another. God could have made us all black, white, green, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu. He did not. He made us of these different types of nations, peoples, faith, ethnicities. Oftentimes those differences are used to exacerbate and to promote violence. But I would argue that our faiths command us to promote peace and harmony amongst each other. And that is one of the mysteries of God, that he would make us of different ethnicities, languages, and religions.
Thank you.
Joe, can I say one thing?
Sure.
In relation to how we would encourage our people, I think, I would just say that I would want my people, number one, to understand that somebody who doesn't believe the same thing as you is not your enemy. It doesn't make them your enemy. I think a lot of times we feel like, and I think you said it, Joel, that we got this attitude like we've got to win an argument first.
Right.
And that's just foolish. I would encourage everyone here, whether you're a Jew, a Muslim, or a Christian, that we all believe we all understand there is a difference. And we all believe we're right. And that's okay. I think we're all smart enough to know we can't all be right, that doesn't work.
Yeah.
So I would encourage my people to build relationships and then encourage the people in those relationships, whether it's a Muslim imam or a Jewish rabbi or someone who is an atheist, let's pursue truth together. And I think that for all of us, we should not be afraid of the truth. And if that's the case, I can pursue truth with you without being fearful of where that will lead, and you can do the same, and we'll arrive at the truth together.
Yeah.
Now, one of us is going to have to change our mind when we get there, but you get the idea that we shouldn't be afraid of that process,
Right.
and that's where I would encourage people to go.
That's a good word. I have I think the Imam wants your mic there. In many ways, my friends in other faiths, all of them, not just Muslim, have made me better at what I believe, what I do. My Muslim friends in particular, I'm quite sure not their objective, and I don't want this to offend you. In fact, I'm complimenting you with this. I mean this sincerely. I'm actually a better Trinitarian because of my Muslim friends. Mm-hmm. Because when I grew up in upstate South Carolina. Okay, so for those of you who are from majority Muslim nations, and there are Muslims who are very devout, they love, they pursue God with all their heart, they love the Quran, they're dedicated to it, and then there are Muslims that are just kind of, in name only. Right? Well, where I'm from, there are Baptists like that. Right? I mean, there are more Baptists than dogs and cats. There are Baptists that are very devout. They love Jesus. They love their faith. They share it. And then there are Baptists that are just there because in the South, you have to be a member of good standing of a Baptist church to be elected to office. It's just the way it works. And so growing up in that kind of an environment, why do you believe this? Why do you believe that? Well, because the Bible says so. Right? That's all I needed as a kid. Now, that childlike faith in the scriptures hasn't gone anywhere. There's a great little Baptist church in upstate South Carolina that is the reason I am where I am today. I love those people because they taught me that. The Bible believes it. The Bible says it. You need to believe it. You need to obey its commands. But that childlike faith eventually has to mature as well. And when people from outside Christianity ask critical questions, I don't take that as an offense. I take it as an opportunity not only to answer them, but also to dig back deeper into my own faith and determine that this 2,000-year witness of the Holy Spirit through the Scriptures and through the history of the church, and what is God saying? What has He said? That's a trip that I've taken many times that I probably wouldn't have had it not been for my friends in other faiths. And I'm thankful for that reason.
Joel, I just wanted to agree with the Imam about one thing that he said, that you tell your people to study Islam, to learn what you believe. And that, to me, is one of the biggest complaints I have as a pastor, is that many Christians, certainly not in elders, because we've got 5 members of elders here. However,
It's Gethsemane, right?
but Westminster. But anyway, we don't know what we believe.
Yeah.
Now, we're ministers up here, Okay, but, the average member of our congregation thinks the 67th book of the Bible is the table of contents, So we, as Christians, we don't know what we believe as we should. Or why we believe. And I'm on Facebook. Some of my members are on Facebook, and they shouldn't be. Okay? And I cringe when I see somebody from my own congregation complaining about Muslims praying. At the state capitol of Texas or in the Capitol building in Austin or whatever. And, while I don't agree with to whom they're praying to, from a Christian perspective, of course, the people who are complaining on Facebook about them doing it don't have a clue how to talk to a Muslim. They don't know what they believe or what we believe. So.
It's less of a desire.
I have no problem with you telling your Muslim congregation, learn your faith. And at the same time, Christians, please.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, it's interesting. When you see that, if it's in a social media environment or anywhere for that matter, it does strike you as someone less concerned about sharing their faith with someone and more concerned about just preserving some kind of cultural identity.
Yeah.
Somebody who's different than me is doing something different. I have to complain about that. I have to fight against that because that makes me uncomfortable. And I think that's where speaking of which, yeah, oh, go ahead. Yeah, sure, go right ahead.
Well, first of all, I don't consider myself evangelical Muslim. Having said that, one thing your friends, Christian friends, Jews, what have you, to believe what you believe is one thing, and actively working towards that, inviting them to become Muslim is another thing for me. Everybody wants their friends, their family members, their co-workers, everybody around him or her, want them to believe what he or she believes. That's perfectly okay with me, for everyone. But on the other hand, like, if I try to convert my Christian friends, my Jews friends, other members of other faith into Islam, that is not what I want. That's not what I believe
Right.
Islam is about.
You're illustrating some diversity within your own faith because there are evangelical Muslims.
Definitely. But I mean,
Yeah.
they're not very, and as far as percentage concerns, they're not very
Right.
big percentage.
Yeah.
That's one thing. And the second thing, when I stated that, well, Muslims, follow one path to God, Christians follow another path to God, and that also does not give me the right to say, well, it first of all gives me right to say that I am right in what I believe.
Yeah.
That's why I'm here. That's why I'm Muslim.
Yeah.
That's why I follow Prophet Muhammad, and that's why I believe in the Quran. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. I would go and be searching other path.
Right.
But in the meantime, this does not give me the right to say, well, I am right, you're wrong, you're going to hell.
Right.
It's not for me to decide who goes where. I cannot say this. Even as a Muslim, even as an Imam,
Yeah.
I have no guarantee I'll be ending up in the heaven.
Yeah.
So it is for God to decide. But from the teachings of the Quran, from the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, what I believe, my path is the right one. That I have a right to say.
Sure.
But I don't have a right to say that the ways you go, don't go there. I
Okay.
cannot say that.
Okay.
And
We may have, some of us at least, may have learned something about your particular expression of Islam that we didn't know before from that. So thank you. I have a question. I do want to take some of these text questions that came in. I'll start with a real uncontroversial one. This past Friday, the National Cathedral, that one uncontroversial, hosted its first Muslim prayer service, which was interrupted by a Christian, it was, by the way, and publicly criticized by Franklin Graham. Would anyone care to comment on these events? Did the National Cathedral go too far? Do the pastors on stage agree with Graham's comments? Which one of you guys? Let me.
there for it.
You were there? Okay, awesome. Give him the microphone, but let me talk to this for just a moment as an evangelical. Because
Joe,
I need.
Can I say something?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
apologize, but
No,
I
go
have
ahead.
an 8 p.m. flight and
You have an 8 p.m. flight?
BWI, so I have to.
You got to go, man. Give Murat a hand and wish him well as he goes to the airport. Thanks for being here, man. Take care. All right. Catch that plane, my friend. Don't go too fast. All right, let me speak to the National Cathedral issue for a moment. There's a couple different layers in which we need to look at this as followers of Jesus. And I'm speaking, and the rest of you who are not Christian, please feel free to listen in, but I'm going to speak to followers of Jesus for just a second, okay? Theologically, there are very stark differences in the way that we perceive God. We all believe in one God, if we're talking about Jews, Christians, Muslims. Here in the National Cathedral, you have an Episcopalian history behind that church. You have Islam coming into that church, Muslims worshiping. Both of them believe in one God. They have very distinct and different perceptions of that God. And so in one sense, they all believe in one God. In another sense, the way they perceive him means that he's either one or the other. He's not the same. And that really sometimes, that's where Franklin Graham's statement came from when he said, it's sad to see something, a building not used for the worship of the one true God. So theologically, we need to understand it that way. Here's the inconsistency that I see in Franklin Graham's statement. And it pains me a little bit to say this because we've worked with his organization for years, continue to. My wife and I both have pretty strong connections with Billy Graham Evangelistic Association. Love what they do. But a lot of what Franklin said has not been helpful, including what he said on Friday. Here's why. Number one, there's an inconsistency in this in that many, many non-Christian groups have used the National Cathedral in the past. Jewish groups have used it. Baha'i groups have used it. I find it a little interesting that now that it's Muslims, there's something being said about it. So what that communicates to me is that there's not as much of a concern about who's being allowed to worship there. There was just a concern about Muslims being allowed to worship there. And that strikes me as a prejudice against a particular religion that I don't find helpful at all. Okay? So just something to keep in mind. I don't find those comments helpful. And I also think, certainly, if somebody says Jesus is Lord in a meeting, can I agree with the statement, but at the same time think it's reprehensible the way the statement is getting rendered and in what context it's getting rendered? There's simply a better way to bear witness to your faith than that. And we live in a society that believes in freedom of religion. You either believe in it or you don't. And you have the National Cathedral that has a right to lease out or lend out its own space to whomever it wants. You have a Muslim group that was willing to go work there. You have freedom of association and freedom of religion, both protected by the First Amendment. You either believe in that or you don't. Okay? So whatever I may think about Muslims worshiping in an Episcopalian church, I think we just have to think this through before we speak out of turn. Otherwise, we end up representing something very different as Christians than Christian faith. I think it's something we just got to be very, very careful that we not do. The truth is the truth, and nothing changes that. Being a jerk about it doesn't make it more true. It just makes you look like a jerk. Okay, and so as we have this coalescing of civilizations, religions, ideas, and we're encountering people, remembering that they're each created in God's image and likeness, that we go forward with that understanding, starting in chapter 1, not chapter 2 of our Christian story, will go a long way in helping us to relate in a much better way to our friends in other faiths. I think we blew it big time at the National Cathedral on Friday. Suhail?
Well, thanks for that. I'll say a couple things, having been there. First, I'll just tell you how it came about, because I think it's an interesting story, just so we get the fact and kind of sift through some of the fiction. The reverend there at the church, I believe her last name is Campbell, she had worked with the ambassador to the United States from South Africa to do a service there last year to commemorate the death of Nelson Mandela. And in doing so, the ambassador from South Africa to the United States, Ibrahim Rasool, who happens to be Muslim, who happened to have served at Robben Island with Nelson Mandela and was one of his close friends and political allies, and then subsequently was appointed to the U.S., become the U.S. ambassador. They struck up a relationship, and at that point it was the Reverend who invited the ambassador to have a Muslim prayer, the Friday prayer at the National Cathedral. So it was a little bizarre because she was asking a South African to invite American Muslims to come in to pray. So, you can't make this stuff up. So he in turn said, "Great idea, would be honored to do it," and then turned to several Muslim organizations, American Muslim organizations, and said, we'd love to do this prayer. And so for the last year, they've been working on it. And there were probably about 100 people, myself included, who went there to pray, and probably about 75 TV cameras. So it was classic Americana at its best. The protester did get up and say that this is a Christian nation, and the church should not be used for anything other than the worship of Jesus Christ. And that part the Christian nation part, we can draw some distinctions. This country is predominantly Christian. It was founded by Christians. But are we a nation that is a Christian nation in the sense that, that's our national religion? Not technically. No. And so that part I quibble with. Where she kind of crossed the line in my mind was she said, and we give you places for you to pray, other places for you to pray. And I would argue, as an American who was born and raised here, she didn't give me anything. The Constitution guarantees my right, but my right to worship comes from God. But that part I took a little bit of umbrage, but not enough to ruin my day. And we had the prayer service. Now, Facebook, is what the Reverend brought up, which is, of course, the greatest arbiter of everything theological, blew up.
Was just the greatest maturity meter known to man.
Exactly. It's been blowing, and on both sides. Most people have been saying this is great. But some people, on both sides, Muslim and non-Muslim, have been saying some things that I would argue are unhelpful. On the Muslim side, I'll address that from my own community, because you got to take the pole out of your own eye, right, before you call out somebody else's speck. And Muslims are saying, why are we praying in a church? There's crosses and symbols of Jesus all around there. Muslims should not pray in a church. And, this is just, we're trying to mix the religions. And then Christians were saying, the flip side wouldn't be allowed in many Muslim countries. And that part of that is true. But what I'll say to end is that, if you go back to history and practice of Islam, in 628, a Christian delegation led by a bishop came to visit with the Prophet, peace be upon him, to engage in what we were just talking about, a discussion on theology. And by the way, it was one bishop, 45 of his people who studied with him, and then 15 men. I don't know what the 15 men were about. I'm assuming they were carrying bags or something. But about 60 people all told. And they, by the way, after several days of discussion, they came to no conclusion, because they are irreconcilable, and we know that. But back then they tried to reconcile. But when the time for prayer came, and this was held in the mosque, the Prophet's mosque in Medina, which is the second most holiest place in Islam, the time for prayer came, and the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, please, I invite you to pray here in the mosque. And those 61 people, Christians, led by the bishop, prayed in the mosque to Jesus Christ. And that was in the presence of the Prophet, peace be upon him, when, by the way, they were strong. So that is an example. And I can tell you right now, just because of space limitations, whether it's in Dulles, where the Muslims have a prayer service at a synagogue, or in other parts of the country where people have Shabbat services in mosques, it happens. And I don't think it in any way weakens or diminishes our practice that we share space, as long as we're not in any way trying to diminish our own religion. The last thing I'll say, this isn't a national cathedral. So this also is kind of a unique sui generis space where people of different faiths have come. Our presidents, some who are practicing, some who are not practicing, have laid there in state, and there have been services. Just a couple weeks ago, they had a big prayer service for Ben Bradley of the Washington Post. So it's also a special place, but this was at the invitation of the Reverend who runs the Episcopal National Cathedral in Washington, D.C.
That actually is a follow-up question that I got as well. Has there been a time in recent history when Muslims have provided housing to Christians here?
In the United States?
May be able to
there
answer
have been
Okay.
mosques that have hosted Christian prayers and Jewish prayers.
Right.
Particularly in peak times. You guys are Uber fans. You know about peak surge pricing. Well, same thing. When there's a big Shabbat or big services, and as you know, with our modern zoning laws, oftentimes churches and synagogues and mosques are kind of in the same stretch as you have right here on this street. So it's not common. I'm not saying it happens all the time, but it's not uncommon or unusual for people to share space. And I'll give you another example. After 9/11 in the Dulles area, it was the Christian churches who came to guard 24/7 the mosque in the area when there were death threats and threats to burn the mosque. It was the Christians who came to the Imam there, Imam Muhammad Majid, and said, "We know you're under some scrutiny here, and you have some folks that have made some crazy threats. We'll stand guard and help you because you can't do it all just by yourselves." Well, and that started that conversation, and that's now why they have this spillover prayers at each other's places, and they need the space.
That's good. Thank you. And I'll say this, in Istanbul, we got there on a Saturday night, and it was one of your cultural centers, and of course there were only 8 of us, but we asked the next day, so tomorrow's Sunday morning, and we had a busy day. We knew we had a busy day. If we got up early, do you all have a place, and would you mind if we worship? And it went off without a hitch. It was great. Of course, you may have had a wonderful room there. In fact, some of our pastors said, "I wonder if there's ever been Christian hymns sung in this room before." It was just kind of a thing. But for us to be able to sing, to worship Jesus, to share, wasn't I had 5 preachers, so I wasn't going to get up and preach to,
The fight was over the offering, though.
It was, yeah, as it usually is with our ilk, and so. But incredible hospitality in your country with your people, and we appreciated that very much. But I did want to get that.
Pastor Bob Roberts, who brought us together, Pastor Bob Roberts of Keller, Texas, who brought Joel and I together, he led a Christian prayer in a mosque in Syria in 2009 when we went with him.
That's right.
And he told me, he said, "Suhail, are you going to be okay? I'm going to be praying to Jesus Christ." And, I'm not going to do the Texas accent. And he's about 6'4". I said, "Absolutely, Bob. Please proceed." And he did that in a Syrian town of Muslims in the mosque itself.
Yeah, you guys know the 7 degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon, that whole thing? There's 2 degrees of separation from Bob Roberts. And everybody knows Bob. This is how Suhail and I got to know one another.
Hey, Joel,
Yeah.
let me go back to the very first question you asked for
Okay.
just a second.
All right, and then I got one more.
I
then
really
we'll
want
dismiss.
to share this. When I had the opportunity to go to Turkey, I had at least 3 and possibly 4, I can't remember which, members of my congregation come to me and say, "Don't go. It's too dangerous." Now, in their defense a little bit, the Syrian civil war was just heating up, but
We were within about 10 miles of the shelling.
yeah, at one point
time.
we were.
Yeah.
But I know the Muslim philosophy of neighbor or stranger, hospitality. If I am in your home, it is your obligation to protect me. And the same thing I assumed was true with being in the Muslim country of Turkey. I never, not one moment, felt in any danger whatsoever when I was in Turkey. And look, folks, I can't say that in the United States.
Baltimore. Can anybody say Baltimore? All right, one final question, and then we're going to have to head on into the next set of breakouts, and we'll tell you where those are in just a moment. But one final, and we'll start on either end, however you want to do it. Just quickly, what is the one thing about your own faith that as you look out here, you would say, this is probably the most misunderstood thing about my faith, and I wish people would know this about my faith?
Put you on the spot.
We're just waiting.
I think we got to take her here.
I've done a little traveling overseas, not to any Islamic country. I've been to India, where predominantly Hindu, some Islam. But one of the things that I've heard from so many other cultures, non-Christian cultures, is that they see the American culture with the movies, the TV, pornographic things, the things that even are on regular American television that we as Christians believe to be indecent. And so often I have heard, if that's what it's like to be Christian, to have that kind of moral standard, we don't want to be a part of the Christian community. And one of the things, I would like folks of other faiths to understand is that we who are true followers of Jesus, we dislike that indecency every bit as much as, Islamic folks would view it. We even though it is part of the American culture, America is not a Christian nation.
That's right.
It was founded, our leaders founded the nation on Judeo-Christian values. I don't even know if they were really Christians. Many of them were deists and so on. Our nation was founded on Judeo-Christian values, but I don't think the nation has ever truly been a Christian nation. And certainly today, a small, there is a minority of folks who are true followers of Jesus Christ. So the culture of our nation does not reflect who we as Christians are. And I know, especially in many Islamic nations, the state and the religion are so intertwined that it's just assumed that what the people believe in their faith is what is reflected in the culture. That certainly is not the case here.
Well, Joel, when you first posed the question, I had to think, because it's not only one thing that that comes to my mind.
Yeah.
Among those, I guess, especially these days, the most important one is the notion of jihad.
Yes.
Is very much being understood wrongly, and to some extent being practiced in the Islamic world wrongly. So that would be the first thing, I guess, first notion that I would want to be understood in a correct manner. And second thing that I would want is that, especially in the Western world, in the United States, and we can include this in European countries in this as well, that many of the people believe that Muslims worship Muhammad, which is not.
You don't. Yeah.
But I mean, if you go, ask average person on the street who says who's Christian, if you pose this question to them, I guess the answer you get would be Muslims worship Muhammad,
Right.
which is not, which we see Prophet Muhammad as one of the messengers of God. He happens to be the last one according to Islam.
Right.
That's where his importance comes. Let me just mention one more thing and I'll pass it.
Help yourself. No, go for it.
Microphone. The third thing is that, especially in the Islamic world, the place of women in the Islamic societies, especially with the headscarves they had to put on. By many, it has been understood that men, their husbands, their fathers, their big brothers, whatever you want to call it, are sort of pressuring women to put those on.
Yeah.
This is, again, not the correct understanding and not the correct practice of religion of Islam. Why women cover their head? Because it's part of religion. If some women do not want to cover their head, it's their problem with the God.
Right.
But it's not for me, to go and you have to cover your head or hair. And I say this in many places, especially in my home. My wife covers her head because of her religion, because of her faith. And I say that if I were to go to her and say, well, just take your head coverings off. This is not a good place to put that on. And I'm not allowing you to do so. I think, and I'm sort of sure on this, she would divorce me. This is the truth.
Okay.
This is the truth. I mean, I don't have anything to say her to cover her head.
Yeah.
And it is same in every Islamic family. It has to be this way.
Yeah.
Of course, I cannot speak for every family or every woman or every man.
Yeah.
But this is how it has to be done.
I appreciate that. And I'm with you on the wife thing. I was with mine in the delivery room for both our boys, and I think she could take me. So, yeah.
I'll try to make mine quick, and it's sort of broad, I guess, but I would say that I would want people to understand, as an evangelical Christian, as a Baptist, within that I'm a Christian who happens to be a Baptist,
That's
not
true.
a Baptist who happens to be a Christian. I think there's even forget Muslims and Jews, I think just people in general sometimes can misunderstand what they see as evangelical Christianity. And we see images like Fred Phelps and those idiots. And unfortunately, and listen, I've dealt with them in person on some issues, so I feel like I'm educated enough to call them idiots and be right. I mean, they are idiots. And but unfortunately, they are Westboro Baptist Church. And people see that and they just assume, well, that's what Baptists are like. They hold up signs at funerals saying God hates people. Or evangelical Christians, if you ask a person who's not an evangelical, what is defined for me an evangelical, are likely to give you a list of the things that we're against, because that's a lot of times people just know that, those are the people that don't like abortion and don't like Muslims and don't like, it's just like. And I would just say, let me tell you this, if I want you to know one thing about me as a Christian, as an evangelical Christian, as somebody who's pastor of a Baptist church, is, I just love Jesus and I love you guys, period. I'm doing my best to follow Jesus, and I want to demonstrate that in my life, in the things that I teach. And I don't hate anybody, because I don't think that Jesus would want me to hate anyone. He doesn't hate anybody. So we are not all red-faced, Bible-thumping, angry people. I think the vast majority of evangelical Christians just love Jesus. And some people express it poorly.
We had a conversation earlier this week with a gentleman, and regrettably he said to me, now thankfully he's at least said it to my face, so he's not a coward, but horribly misinformed. He said, Joel, I don't know why you're appearing on stage with people like that. They are the enemy. Now I want you to think about that for a minute, because here's what I said back to him, because he claims to be a follower of Jesus. I said, brother, I called him brother. I said, what does your faith teach that you were from the moment you were born until the minute you believed? It teaches that you were an enemy of God. What did Jesus do for his enemies? And what is it that you propose I ought to do? These aren't my enemies, but just assume you're right for just a moment. What should I do for any other human being created in the image of God? If we believe that Jesus was willing to give his life so that anyone who believes can have eternal life, if that's what we believe, and we treat people for whom we believe Jesus died as our enemy, who do you think we're going to have to answer to one day for that? And so I think that's an incredible misunderstanding. Is who's the enemy? The Christian story is not a story of good people and bad people and heroes and enemies. It is the story of God and a humanity that he is redeeming back to himself. And if we keep that in the right perspective, then perhaps we might relate to other people a lot better. So you guys have anything else you want to say?
Yeah, my red face is because of high blood pressure, and if you've got a Bible, I'll thump it and prove it. Now, the one thing I'd like to say in response to Joel's question is, don't judge Christianity based on Christians. Judge it based on Jesus.
Yeah.
That's good. Anything you want to add to that before we let
This is the point where everything's been said, but not everybody said it. So I'll echo actually both sentiments from the Imam and from my pastor friends, because oftentimes I'm in this funny situation of defending Christians to my Muslim friends who have just as many stereotypes about Christians, some of what you articulated, Pastor Brian, about Christians or about the West. You know, they say that's all about pornography and materialism, and that's not what we want. And I say, well, that's not what Christians want either, you know. And with Muslim, just as the Imam said, for both Muslims and non-Muslim audiences, it's to understand jihad and violence and extremism, for how damaging and hurtful that is to one's soul, not to mention to other innocents, the rights of women in Islam, the true status of women in Islam. And then the third thing I'll add, and that is that both for Muslims and for non-Muslims alike, particularly when it comes to in the context of being an American or living in the West, whatever the West might be defined in, and that is, you can be a devout Muslim and be a loyal American. And one of the proudest moments at the prayer just Friday was not that we were praying in the National Cathedral, it was that the person next to me was in uniform, wearing his uniform of the 101st Airborne. And there were two Navy Muslims in the Navy. I know Pastor Brian's not crazy with the Navy guys, but you know, as a Marine, he's a Marine. But that was, I felt proud that they were there, and particularly in uniform, because just to what that woman said, you know, we give you places to pray, what are you doing here? I said, look, we love our country and we're fighting to defend our country like our brothers and sisters of other faiths and other ethnicities. And that shouldn't in any way diminish our Americanness or our sense of patriotism. There's a difference between nationalism, which I think is a disease, and patriotism, love of one's country. And I think that's something that I was just proud that I want Muslims particularly to feel and know that they can be American and devout Muslims, and that those are not in any way contradictory, that they can be one and the same, just as you can be Christian and American.
That's a good word. Thank you. I want to say this one thing, and then we're done for this session. But you have to hear this story. It won't take me but a couple minutes. Emre Çelik is not here, so I can talk about him. He is director of the Rumi Forum. Jenna was here, I think. I don't know if Jenna's still with us. Yeah, she's still back there. Emre and I were in Texas together, several of our pastors together. We're Bob's church. This was last year. And we actually were fed dinner by some Rumi Forum folks down there. Wonderful hospitality. And I checked my GPS and I realized we're only about 2 miles from Dallas Cowboys Stadium. Okay? Now all the Redskin fans, just shut up a minute, all right? Just let me finish. Whatever you think about the Cowboys, that stadium is an architectural wonder if you've never been there. And I wanted my Turkish friends, be quiet, I wanted my Turkish friends to see it. So we go down, we pull in, there's nobody there, it's an empty parking lot, and there's this main drive up, and then there's a set of crash pylons, and then there's a road, and another set of crash pylons, and then there's this all glass entrance. This thing is beautiful, and I wanted them to see it. So we get up to the crash pylons. I'm not thinking about it. I whip around the pylons. We're all in a van, and I pull right up to the glass. I put it up in park, and then I start working on my GPS. Yeah, you see, you know how this story ends, right? I start working on my GPS to get us back to the church, and one of the pastors in the back, I think it was James Pope, he said, Joel, we need to go. I said, yeah, I know, we're going to be late. He said, no, we got to go. And I looked up, and security is starting to form, right? And they're starting to come through the door, and I went, oh, yeah, I just drove around a crowd. That probably wasn't the smartest thing I've ever done in my life. So I pulled it in drive, and I'm going out the door, and Emre Çelik, Turkish Aussie Muslim, he is a walking globalization movement, right? So he's right here in the passenger seat. He rolls down the window as we're driving out. He leans out the window, and he said, this time it wasn't the Muslim, it was the Baptist. Right? So, here's why I share that with you. Sometimes one of the best things you can learn to do to love each other is laugh together and just have a good time together. People are people. Get to know them as people. If you're a follower of Jesus in this building, do what Jesus did and love people as people. And to my Muslim friends who are here tonight, I love you. I hope you know that. I love you. I don't believe as you do. I'd love for you to believe like me, but I will fight and I will die for your right to worship as you choose. Because that's who we are and that's where we live. And if you don't hear anything else, hear that. We believe God loves you and we love you. All right? And thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for being a part of this. Guys, thanks so much for giving these folks a glimpse into what preachers and imams talk about when they get together. And we're going to go back into breakouts now. I know we're running a little bit late. Here's what we're going to do. The last